She'd buried Thomas 3 months ago, his body broken from a fall that witnesses swore was accidental. The same week, James Hartwick had appeared at her door with legal papers and a sheriff's deputy, claiming Thomas had signed over the property to settle debts Clara had never heard of. Within a fortnight, she and her 9 children were on the road with 2 wagons, a lame horse, and less than $40 to their name. The wagons were gone now, sold for food in the last town that had let them stay long enough to sell anything. "Mama!" Samuel's voice cracked with thirst. At 8 years old, he'd become the man of the family by default, and the weight of it showed in his 2 serious eyes. "Emma's burning up." Clara stopped walking, her whole body screaming in protest. The August heat pressed down like a physical thing, turning the air thick and hard to breathe. She turned to look at her youngest daughter, cradled in Samuel's thin arms. Emma was barely 2. Her cheeks were flushed scarlet, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Let me see her." Clara's hands trembled as she took the child, feeling the dangerous heat radiating from her small body. Fever. In this heat, with no water, no shelter, no medicine. Behind Samuel, the rest of her children stood in a ragged line along the road. 16-year-old Margaret held baby Ruth, who'd mercifully fallen asleep despite her hunger. 14-year-old James, named for his father, though Clara sometimes wished she'd chosen differently, stood with his arm around 10-year-old Catherine, both of them swaying with exhaustion. 12-year-old William had 6-year-old Lily on his back, her arms locked around his neck. 9-year-old Grace leaned against 11-year-old Daniel, neither of them speaking, just breathing in the hot silence. 9 children, all of them depending on her, all of them slowly starving because no town would take in a widow with a brood this size. "We need water," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need shade." "There's nothing, Mama." Margaret's voice held the flat tone of someone who'd stopped believing in miracles. "We've been walking for hours. There's nothing but empty land." Clara looked down the road ahead. Heat waves shimmered across the packed dirt, making the horizon ripple like water. To the left and right, scrubland stretched to distant mountains, dotted with sage and the occasional twisted juniper. No buildings, no creeks, no help. "Then we keep walking." Clara shifted Emma's weight, feeling the child's ragged breath against her neck. "We keep walking until we find something." "Mama." Lily's small voice carried clearly in the stillness. "Maybe we're too many. Maybe that's why nobody wants us." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stopped walking, turned to face all 9 of her children, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "Don't you ever say that!" Her voice came out fierce, almost angry. "Don't you ever think that! You are wanted, every single one of you. You are loved and you belong together, and we will find a way." But even as she said it, Clara felt the lie of it. They'd tried 4 towns, 4 times. She'd knocked on doors, begged for work, offered to do anything, cooking, cleaning, mending, field work. 4 times she'd seen the same calculation in people's eyes. 1 woman, 9 hungry mouths, no man to vouch for her character. Too risky, too expensive, too many. In the last town, a shopkeeper had pulled her aside and suggested quietly that perhaps she might consider placing the children in different homes. Good Christian families who might take 1 or 2, spread them out, give them opportunities she couldn't provide. Clara had walked out without responding, gathered her children, and left town within the hour. She'd lose them altogether or keep them all together. There was no middle ground. "Come on." She started walking again, Emma's hot weight against her shoulder. "Just a little farther." They walked as the sun climbed higher. William stumbled, went down on one knee, got back up without complaint. Catherine was crying silently, tears making clean tracks through the dust on her face. Baby Ruth woke and started wailing, hungry again, always hungry. Claire's vision started to blur at the edges. The road swam in front of her. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, distant and unreliable. "Please," she thought, not quite a prayer, not quite a plea. "Please just let me get them somewhere safe." Just that. Nothing else. The sound of hoofbeats registered slowly through her exhaustion. At first, Clara thought she was imagining it, her mind conjuring rescue because her body had given up. But the sound grew clearer, and when she turned, squinting against the sun, she saw a rider approaching from the direction they'd come. "Mama?" Margaret's voice was tight with fear. Stay together. Clara shifted Emma to her other shoulder, her free hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she kept in her pocket. Not much of a weapon, but all she had. The rider wasn't hurrying. He approached at an easy lope, and as he got closer, Clara could make out details. Tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat and range clothes that had seen hard use. His horse was a solid roan gelding, well-fed and cared for. 20 feet away, he slowed to a walk. 10 feet away, he stopped. For a long moment, he just looked at them. This ragged procession of a woman and 9 children standing in the middle of nowhere under a merciless sun. His face was weathered, creased around the eyes and mouth, with a few days' worth of dark stubble. Maybe 40 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who'd spent their lives outdoors. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said finally. His voice was low and rough, like he didn't use it much. "We're traveling." Clara lifted her chin, trying to sound like she had a destination, like this was all according to plan. The man's eyes moved over her children, lingering on Emma's flushed face, on Samuel's too thin frame, on the way they all swayed where they stood. Traveling where? Clara had no answer to that. Her mind was too tired for convincing lies. "The next town," she said. "Next town is 15 miles east. Walking pace with kids, you might make it by nightfall tomorrow." He paused. "If you don't lose anyone to heat stroke first." The words were blunt but not cruel, just stating facts. "We'll manage," Clara said. "That one's fevered." He nodded toward Emma. "And those boys look like they haven't eaten in days. You won't make 15 miles. "We don't have a choice." The man studied her for another long moment. Then he swung down from his saddle in one smooth motion, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his whole life on horseback. "Name's Luke Calder," he said. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles north, spring-fed creek, cool barn, food in the larder." He looked at Clara directly. "Your kids need water and rest, and that little one needs to get out of the sun before her fever gets worse." Clara's throat tightened. She'd heard generous offers before, had learned to hear the price that came attached. "We don't have money to pay you." "Didn't ask for money." "Then what are you asking for?" Luke Calder's expression didn't change. "Nothing. Your kids are suffering. I can help with that. It's not complicated." "Everything's complicated," Clara said. "Not this." He turned, reached for his horse's reins. 3 miles north, follow the creek line when you see it. White ranch house, red barn. Can't miss it." He swung back into the saddle. "I'll ride ahead. Get things ready. You come along at your own pace." "Wait." The word came out before Clara could stop it. Luke looked down at her, waiting. "Why would you help us? You don't know us. You don't know anything about us." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving over her children again, really looking at them, seeing them as people rather than problems. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you're trying to keep your family together in a place that makes that damn near impossible. I know those kids need help, and I know I've got help to give." He adjusted his hat against the sun. Sometimes it really is that simple. Then he turned his horse and rode north, leaving Clara standing in the road with 9 pairs of eyes watching her. "Mama?" Margaret's voice was small, uncertain. "Is it a trick?" Clara looked down at Emma's flushed face, felt her daughter's rapid heartbeat against her chest, looked at Samuel, who could barely stand but was still trying to be strong. At all of them, her 9 reasons for living, slowly breaking under the weight of a world that didn't want them. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but Emma needs water. You all need water, and we're not going to make 15 miles. She shifted Emma's weight and started walking north. The creek appeared first, a silver line cutting through the scrubland, bordered by cottonwoods that promised shade and relief. Clara heard her children's pace quicken behind her, heard the sharp intake of breath that meant hope, dangerous and painful. "Slow," she said. "Stay together. Don't run." But they were already moving faster, drawn by the sound of running water like moths to flame. Clara let them go ahead, watched them drop to their knees at the creek's edge, cupping water in their hands, drinking like they'd never tasted anything so sweet. "Not too fast," she called. "You'll make yourselves sick." She knelt beside them, set Emma down gently in the shallow water, felt the child sigh as the coolness touched her fevered skin. For a moment, Clara let herself stop thinking, stop worrying, just felt the creak's chill on her own burning feet, and let something very close to tears build behind her eyes. "Mama, look!" William was pointing upstream. Clara followed his gaze and saw the buildings Luke Calder had described. A white ranch house, simple but well-maintained, with a wide porch that promised shade. Behind it, a red barn, solid and substantial, corrals, a chicken coop, garden plots. It looked like everything Clara had lost, everything she'd failed to keep. "Is that it?" Grace whispered. "Is that where the man said we could go?" "For tonight," Clara said carefully. "Just for tonight, to rest and get Emma cooled down. Then we'll move on." "But Mama—" "We don't accept charity," Clara said, the words automatic, drilled into her by her own mother decades ago. "We don't become beholden to strangers." "You already are beholden," a voice said from behind her. Clara spun, her hand going to her knife, and found Luke Calder standing 10 feet away. He'd approached silently, or she'd been too distracted to hear him. Either way, it set her nerves on edge. "You're alive because I pointed you to water," Luke continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Your daughter's alive because you're not walking her through heat toward a town you'd never reach. You're already beholden. Question is whether you're proud enough to refuse what comes next." Clara stood slowly, placing herself between this man and her children. "And what comes next?" "Food, rest, medical supplies for the fever." Luke looked past her to where Emma lay in the creek, Margaret holding her steady. "Tomorrow, if you want to move on, you move on. But tonight, your kids sleep in beds and eat until they're full." "Why?" The word came out sharp, edged with all Clara's exhaustion and fear. "Why would you do this? What do you want from us?" Luke's expression shifted, something complicated moving across his weathered features. "I want you to let me help," he said quietly. "That's all. Just that." Clara stared at him, trying to read the truth in his face. She'd gotten good at spotting lies. She'd had to. But all she saw in Luke Calder's eyes was a kind of tired sincerity, like a man who'd made a decision and wasn't interested in debating it. "One night," she said finally. "One night," Luke agreed. He led them to the ranch house, and Clara braced herself for judgment, for the change in his expression when he truly understood what he was taking on. 9 children, all of them dirty and half-starved, descending on his home like locusts. But Luke just opened the door and stepped aside. "Washroom's down the hall," he said. "I'll get the stove going. Heat water for baths. There's a bedroom upstairs with 4 beds. You'll have to share, but it's better than the ground." Margaret was already inside, looking around with wide eyes. The house was simple but clean, furnished with handmade furniture that showed care in its construction. No woman's touches, no curtains, no decorative items, no softness. But it was solid. Safe. Clara carried Emma inside, felt the coolness of the house wash over her fevered skin. "I'll need clean cloths," she said. "And if you have any willow bark or—" "Medicine cabinets in the kitchen," Luke said. "Help yourself to whatever you need." He disappeared down the hall, and Clara stood in the center of the front room, suddenly unmoored. She'd been moving on pure survival instinct for so long that stopping, accepting help, felt like standing still in a river current, dangerous and disorienting. "Mama, there's real beds!" Lily's voice echoed from upstairs, filled with wonder. "And he's got a whole pantry," James called from the kitchen. "Mama, there's food for weeks!" Clara felt her knees start to buckle. She caught herself on the back of a chair, breathing hard, Emma's weight familiar against her chest. "You all right?" She hadn't heard Luke return. He stood in the doorway, watching her with that same careful expression. "Fine," Clara said automatically. Then, because exhaustion had stripped away her ability to lie convincingly, "No, but we will be." Luke nodded slowly. "Bathwater's heating. I'll get dinner started. You take care of your girl." He moved past her toward the kitchen, giving her space, and Clara realized something that made her throat tight. He wasn't hovering, wasn't watching her children like they might steal something, wasn't treating them like charity cases or problems to be managed. He was just helping, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Clara carried Emma upstairs, found Margaret already organizing the younger children, assigning beds and laying out the few clean clothes they had left. The bedroom was simple. 4 narrow beds, whitewashed walls, a single window overlooking the corrals. But it might as well have been a palace for the way her children looked at it. "Real beds, Mama," Samuel said softly, touching the quilt on the nearest one like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "Just for tonight," Clara reminded herself. She spent the next hour tending to Emma, bathing her fevered skin with cool cloths, getting willow bark tea into her small body, watching anxiously for any sign the fever was breaking. Margaret helped with the younger children, getting them washed and changed, while the older boys took turns in the washroom Luke had prepared. By the time Clara made it downstairs, the sun was setting and the kitchen smelled like heaven. Luke had made stew, thick with vegetables and meat, served with fresh bread that must have come from town. Her children sat around the table, bowls in front of them, but nobody was eating yet. They were waiting for her, their eyes following her movement as she entered the room. "Eat," Clara said softly, and watched them fall on the food like the starving children they were. Luke stood at the stove, his back to the table, giving them privacy for their desperation. Clara appreciated that more than she could say. She filled a bowl for herself, stood by the counter because all the chairs were taken, and took her first bite of real food in longer than she wanted to admit. It was good, simple, but good. "Your daughter?" Luke asked quietly, still not looking at her. "Fever started to break. She'll need rest, but she'll be all right." "Good." They stood in silence while Clara's children ate, the sound of spoons on bowls the only noise in the kitchen. Clara watched them, memorizing this moment, all 9 of them together, fed, safe, under a roof. Tomorrow they'd move on, but tonight, just for tonight, they could rest. "Where were you headed?" Luke asked. "Before." Clara took another bite of stew, buying time. The truth was simple: nowhere. They'd been running from what they'd lost, not toward anything in particular. "Somewhere that would take us," she said finally. "And if nowhere did?" The question was too close to the thoughts that kept Clara awake at night. The calculation she'd been running in her head for weeks. 9 children, limited money, winter coming. At some point, the mathematics would become impossible, and she'd have to make choices that would break her. "Then we'd figure it out," Clara said, her voice flat. Luke finally turned to look at her. In the lamplight, his face seemed older, marked by experiences Clara couldn't begin to guess at. "I lost my wife 4 years ago," he said quietly. "Childbed fever. Baby didn't make it either." He paused, his throat working. "This house has been empty since. Too big for one person. Too quiet." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." Not looking for sympathy. Luke's eyes moved to the table, to her children eating like they'd never stop. "Just explaining why I understand what it feels like when the mathematics don't work, when you're trying to hold on to something in a world that keeps taking things away." "So this is what?" Clara heard the edge in her own voice, the defensive anger that came from being too close to breaking. "You collecting strays? Building yourself a ready-made family to fill the silence?" Luke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition maybe, that she was lashing out because she was afraid. "No," he said simply. "This is me offering you work and shelter if you want it. No obligations beyond honest labor. You stay as long as it suits you, leave when it doesn't." "Work doing what?" "Ranch needs help. Garden needs tending. House could use a woman's hand." He gestured to the sparse kitchen. "I can pay wages. Not much, but enough to build back what you lost. And your kids would have a roof, regular meals, safety." Clara stared at him, trying to find the trap. There had to be a trap. Nobody gave away this much for nothing. "Why?" she asked again. "The real reason." Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been grief, might have been loneliness, might have been both. "Because I have more than I need, and you need more than you have. And because those children deserve better than dying of thirst on a dirt road because the world decided they were too many." He held her gaze steadily, and Clara saw the truth of it. No ulterior motive, no hidden price, just a man with empty space trying to do something decent. "1 month?" she heard herself say. "We'll stay 1 month, work for wages, save what we can. Then we move on. All right? And we pull our weight. My children know how to work. We won't be charity cases. Never thought you would be. Clara nodded sharply, sealing the agreement, ignoring the small voice in her head that whispered she was making a mistake, that accepting help meant accepting risk, that trusting anyone was dangerous. But Emma's fever was breaking. Her children were eating, and for the first time in 3 months, Clara felt like she could take a full breath. Tomorrow, she'd worry about the cost. Tonight, she'd let them rest. Clara woke before dawn, years of early rising too ingrained to break. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed too soft, the room too quiet, the air too still. Then Emma shifted against her side, and memory flooded back. Luke Calder's ranch. 1 month. Then they'd leave. She slipped out of bed carefully, checking each of her children in the gray, pre-dawn light. All 9 of them breathing steadily, Emma's forehead finally cool, everyone safe for another night. Downstairs, she found Luke already up, making coffee at the stove. He glanced up when she entered, nodded a greeting, and went back to his work. Couldn't sleep? Clara asked. Rancher's hours. Sun's almost up. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across the counter to her. Your kids will need a few more hours. Let them rest. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten, turning the landscape from black to gray to the soft gold of early morning. What needs doing? She asked. Luke raised an eyebrow. First day, and you're already working? We don't take charity. So you said. He took a long drink of coffee, considering. Garden needs weeding, chicken coop needs cleaning, pantry could use organizing, inside work until you get your bearings. And after that? After that, we'll see what you're good at. He paused. Your boys old enough for ranch work? James and William are. Daniel and Samuel can learn. Fair enough. Luke drained his cup, set it in the sink. I'll be in the north pasture checking fences. You need anything? Bell's by the door. Ring it and I'll come. He left through the back door, moving with that same easy confidence, and Clara was alone in the quiet kitchen with her coffee and the rising sun. For the first time in months, she let herself think past the next day, the next town, the next rejection. Let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to stop running. Then she set down her cup and went to start her work, because imagining was dangerous and staying was impossible, and in 1 month they'd be gone anyway. It was better not to hope for anything else. The work came easier than Clara expected, her hands remembering rhythms she'd thought she'd forgotten. She spent that first morning in the garden, pulling weeds from between rows of beans and squash, her fingers dark with soil, sweat collecting at the small of her back. The physical labor felt good after weeks of helpless walking, gave her something to control when everything else had spun so far beyond her grasp. By noon, Margaret had joined her, working the rows on the opposite side with steady efficiency. At 16, her eldest daughter had grown harder in the past months, her softness worn away by necessity. She worked without speaking, her jaw set in a way that reminded Clara painfully of Thomas. You don't have to do this, Clara said quietly. You could rest another day. Rest doesn't put food on the table. Margaret didn't look up from her weeding, and we're not staying long enough to get comfortable. Clara heard the warning in her daughter's voice, the fear that they might start to depend on this place, this stranger's generosity. She understood it, felt it herself every time she walked through Luke's well-stocked kitchen or watched her younger children sleep in real beds. 1 month, Clara confirmed. Just like I said. Margaret nodded, satisfied, and they worked in silence while the sun climbed higher. By evening, Clara had cleaned the chicken coop, organized the pantry, and started inventory of the household supplies. Her children had scattered across the property, the older boys helping Luke mend fence in the pastures, the younger ones exploring the barn with the cautious wonder of children who had been disappointed too many times to trust good fortune. Catherine and Grace had found the remnants of what must have been a vegetable garden closer to the house, now overgrown, and had appointed themselves its caretakers without being asked. Clara stood on the porch as the sun set, watching her scattered family, and felt something uncomfortably close to peace settle over her shoulders. They settle in fast, Luke said from behind her. Clara turned to find him leaning against the porch rail, his shirt dusty from the day's work, his face marked with the particular exhaustion of physical labor. He'd worked alongside her boys all day. She'd learned from James at dinner, treating them like men rather than children, showing them how to splice wire and set posts properly. "They're adaptable," Clara said. "They've had to be. James is a good worker, listens well. William, too, once he stops trying to prove he's stronger than he is." Clara felt a small swell of pride despite herself. Their father taught them well. "Your husband?" "Yes." Clara's throat tightened. "Thomas. He was a good man, a good father." Luke nodded slowly, his eyes on the darkening horizon. "What happened to him?" Clara had told this story so many times it had become rote, the edges worn smooth by repetition. "Fall from a barn roof, broke his neck. The witnesses said it was an accident." She paused, tasting the bitterness of old anger. "His business partner said different, said Thomas owed money, said the land was payment." "And you think the partner lied?" "I know he lied." Clara's hands clenched on the porch rail. "Thomas kept records, everything documented. But James Hartwick had a lawyer and a judge who owed him favors, and I had 9 children and no husband to speak for me. The mathematics were simple." Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "This Hartwick, he the one who took your land?" "Took everything. The land, the house, the livestock. Left us enough for 2 wagons and told us to be grateful he didn't press charges for the debts he claimed Thomas owed." Clara heard the shake in her own voice, forced it steady. "We were out within a week." "Where was this?" "Small town called Redemption, about 90 miles south. Pretty name for an ugly place." Luke's expression had gone distant, thoughtful. "I know Redemption. Know Hartwick, too, by reputation. He's been buying up land around there for years, consolidating property. Always seems to get good deals from widows and desperate men." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "You think he's done this before?" "I think men like Hartwick don't get rich by accident." Luke straightened, his jaw set. "And I think the law looks different when you've got money to back it." "The law looked away when I needed it." Clara's voice came out flat, empty of the rage that had burned so hot 3 months ago. Now there was just exhaustion, just acceptance of how the world worked. "And there's no point dwelling on it. We can't fight him. We can barely feed ourselves." "Maybe." Luke's tone suggested he didn't quite agree, but he let it drop. "Your kids need anything tonight?" "Just rest. And maybe more of that stew, if there's any left." "I'll heat it up." Luke moved toward the door, then paused. "Clara?" She looked at him, struck by the sound of her name in his rough voice. He'd been careful to keep distance, to call her ma'am or Mrs. Hayes, maintaining propriety even as he offered them shelter. "You did good work today," he said quietly. "The garden looks better than it has in years. The house, too. I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying it so you know you're earning your keep." Something in Clara's chest loosened, some knot she hadn't known was there. "Thank you." He nodded and disappeared inside, leaving Clara alone with the cricket song and the cooling air and the strange, fragile feeling of being seen. The days fell into rhythm. Clara woke before dawn, started coffee, prepared breakfast for her children and Luke. The older boys worked the ranch alongside Luke, learning the skills Thomas had been teaching them before he died. How to read cattle, how to judge weather, how to fix what broke before it became unfixable. Margaret took over the household management with quiet competence, teaching the younger girls cooking and sewing and all the domestic arts Clara had once taken for granted. The middle children, Daniel, Catherine, William, Grace, found their own niches, making themselves useful in whatever ways their ages allowed. Emma recovered slowly, her fever finally breaking on the 3rd day, leaving her weak but alive. She spent her days following Clara through the house, her small hand tucked into her mother's skirt, afraid to let her out of sight. "She thinks if she stops watching, you'll disappear," Margaret said one afternoon, her tone matter-of-fact. Clara looked down at Emma's dark head, felt her daughter's grip tighten reflexively. "I'm not going anywhere." "You can't promise that." Margaret's voice held no accusation, just hard truth. "None of us can." By the end of the first week, Clara had reorganized the entire household, established routines, and begun the harder work of repairing the neglect that came from 4 years of a man living alone. She mended curtains, patched sheets, scrubbed floors that hadn't seen proper attention in longer than she wanted to guess. Luke accepted her efforts without comment, but she noticed small changes: fresh flowers on the kitchen table, new shelves he'd built for her growing collection of preserves, a rocking chair that appeared on the porch one morning, perfectly sized for her. "You don't have to do all this," she told him one evening, finding him in the barn working on what looked like a child's bed frame. Luke glanced up, his hand steady on the wood. "I know." "Then why are you?" He set down his tools, brushed sawdust from his hands. "Because your littlest ones are sleeping 3 to a bed, and because I can. Same reason you don't have to clean my house top to bottom, but you do anyway." Clara had no argument for that. She watched him work for a moment, the careful precision of his movements, the way he checked each joint twice before moving on. "You're good with your hands," she said. "Had a lot of practice." Luke ran his palm over the smooth wood, testing for splinters. "My father was a carpenter. Taught me the trade before I decided ranching suited me better." "Do you miss it?" "Sometimes. There's something satisfying about building things, making something useful from raw materials." He looked at her directly. "Your boys are picking it up fast. James especially. He's got the eye for it." "Thomas was teaching him." Clara's throat tightened. "Before." Luke nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. "I'll keep teaching him, if that's all right with you. Boys should have skills beyond ranch work." "We're only staying a month." "I know." Luke returned to his work, his tone mild. "But a month's long enough to learn something useful." Clara left him to his carpentry, walked back to the house where her children's laughter drifted through the open windows. She stood on the porch listening, really listening, to the sound of them playing instead of surviving, and felt the dangerous pull of permanence. 1 month, she reminded herself. They'd agreed on 1 month. But already, it was starting to feel like not nearly enough time. The second week brought visitors. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching, looked up to see 3 riders coming up the main road. Luke emerged from the barn, his posture subtly changed, not quite tense, but alert, watchful. "Go inside," he said quietly to Clara. "Keep the children in." Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing, but do it anyway." She gathered the younger children quickly, herded them inside, stationed Margaret at the window with instructions to watch and listen. Then she stood in the doorway, close enough to hear, ready to move if necessary. The 3 riders were well dressed for ranch country. Clean shirts, good horses, the kind of men who made their living with papers rather than ropes. The one in front, older and heavier than his companions, had the look of someone used to being obeyed. "Luke Calder," the man said, his tone friendly enough but his eyes sharp. "Been a while." "Hartwell." Luke's voice gave nothing away. "What brings you out this way?" Clara's hands clenched on the doorframe. Not Hartwick, but close enough to make her pulse race. She watched the exchange with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read danger in the spaces between words. "Just checking on the property values in this area," Hartwell said easily. "Making sure everyone's doing all right. Heard you'd taken on some help. Ranch needed it." "So I see." Hartwell's gaze moved past Luke to the house, lingering on Clara in the doorway. "That's quite a bit of help. Big family you've got there." "They work hard, earn their keep." "I'm sure they do." Hartwell's tone suggested otherwise. "But people talk, Luke. And the talk is that you've got a woman and a whole brood of children living under your roof and no legal arrangement to speak of. Makes folks wonder about the propriety of it." Clara felt ice slide down her spine. She'd been so focused on survival, on getting her children safe, that she hadn't thought about how it would look. A widow and 9 children living with an unmarried man. Luke's posture hadn't changed, but something in the air shifted, grew colder. "What folks wonder is their business. What happens on my property is mine." Of course, of course." Hartwell raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Just passing along what I've heard. Wouldn't want there to be any complications. Legal or otherwise." "There won't be." "Good. Good." Hartwell gathered his reins, preparing to leave. "You take care, Luke, and you might want to think about making things more official for the sake of those children, if nothing else. The law takes a dim view of improper situations involving minors." They rode away, and Clara watched Luke stand perfectly still, until they disappeared down the road. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, and he turned back toward the house. Clara met him at the porch steps. What was that about? Hartwell's a land speculator, works with James Hartwick. Clara finished the sentence, everything clicking into place with sickening clarity. They're partners, aren't they? Luke nodded slowly. Different operations, but they coordinate. Hartwell handles this territory, Hartwick handles the southern region. They buy cheap from desperate people, sell high to newcomers. And now they know I'm here. Clara felt the walls closing in, the brief illusion of safety shattering. They'll tell Hartwick. He'll come. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Claire's mind raced, already calculating. They'd need to leave soon before Hartwick could cause more trouble, before he could use her presence here against Luke, against all of them. We should go, tonight. We've saved a little. It's enough to get us to the next territory, and no. The word was quiet, but absolute. Claire stared at Luke, seeing something hard and unyielding in his expression. You don't understand, she said. James Hartwick destroyed my life once. I won't let him do it again, and I won't let him destroy yours in the process. And you don't understand. Luke's voice stayed level, but intensity burned beneath it. I'm not afraid of Hartwick or Hartwell or any other vulture in a suit. They came here to intimidate, to make you run. I'm not going to help them do it. This isn't about being afraid. It's about being smart. You're one man. He has lawyers, judges, money, and you have 9 children who are finally eating regular meals and sleeping in beds, who are starting to look less like refugees and more like kids again. Luke's jaw set. I'm not asking you to stay forever, but I'm asking you not to run just because some bastard in a clean shirt thinks he can scare you off my property. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to explain that running wasn't cowardice but survival, that she'd learned the hard way how fights against men like Hartwick ended. But she looked past Luke to where James and William were watching from the barn, their young faces tight with worry, and thought about packing up again, walking away from the first safety they'd known in months. 1 month, she said, her voice shaking. That was the agreement. We've got 2 weeks left. Then we go, before this gets worse. 2 weeks, then, Luke held her gaze. But in those 2 weeks, you let me worry about Hartwick and Hartwell. You focus on your kids. Deal? It wasn't a deal. It was a temporary truce with disaster, a postponement of the inevitable. But Clara was tired of running, and her children were watching, and Luke's steady presence felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on since Thomas died. Deal, she said, and prayed she wasn't making a fatal mistake. The trouble came 5 days later, just when Clara had started to breathe easier. She was in the garden with Catherine and Grace when she heard shouting from the direction of the creek. She dropped her basket and ran, her daughters close behind, and found Samuel and Daniel in a standoff with 2 boys she didn't recognize. Town kids by their clothes, older than her sons, but not quite men. What's going on? Clara kept her voice level, authoritative. They said we're squatters, Daniel said, his fists clenched at his sides. Said we're stealing from Mr. Calder, living off him like parasites. The taller of the 2 town boys sneered. Everybody knows what's really going on here. Your ma's bought your keep the old-fashioned way, and you're all just baggage she brought along. Clara's vision went white at the edges. She stepped forward, putting herself between the town boy and her sons, and let every ounce of her fury show in her face. Get off this property, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Now. Or what? The boy's bravado faltered slightly, but he held his ground. You gonna tell your keeper? Everyone knows he's just using you till he gets tired of... He didn't get to finish. Luke appeared from behind Clara, moving faster than she'd have thought possible, and had the boy by his shirt collar before anyone could react. You've got 3 seconds to get on your horse and ride, Luke said, his voice flat and cold. 1. The boy's face went pale. We didn't mean... 2. Both boys scrambled for their horses, mounting clumsily, nearly falling in their haste. They were gone in a thunder of hooves, leaving dust and ugly words hanging in the air. Luke stood perfectly still for a moment, his hands clenched, his breathing controlled. Then he turned to Daniel and Samuel. You boys all right? Yes, sir, Daniel said quietly. We didn't start it. I know you didn't. Luke's expression softened slightly. But next time someone talks like that, you come get me. Don't engage. Understand? Yes, sir. The boys headed back toward the barn, and Luke finally looked at Clara. She saw the anger still simmering in his eyes, carefully banked, but not gone. I'm sorry, she said. I should have known this would happen. Should have thought about... Don't. Luke's voice was rough. Don't apologize for other people's ugliness, and don't apologize for being here. But they're right, aren't they? Clara heard the bitterness in her own voice. About how it looks. A woman and 9 children living in an unmarried man's house. Of course, people assume the worst. People always assume the worst doesn't make them right, but it makes us vulnerable. Clara felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. It gives Hartwick ammunition if he wants to cause trouble. He could claim impropriety, could use it to take my children, He won't. Luke's certainty should have been reassuring, but Clara had stopped believing in certainty months ago. That night, Margaret found Clara on the porch, staring out at the dark hills. We need to leave, Margaret said without preamble, before this gets worse. I know. Then why are we still here? Clara didn't have a good answer. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to pack up and disappear before Hartwick could orchestrate whatever move he was planning. But Emma was finally gaining weight. The boys were learning skills that might help them build a future. And for the first time since Thomas died, her children were laughing again. 2 more weeks, Clara said. We'll save what we can, get supplies, plan our next move, then we'll go. And go where? Margaret's voice held all the questions Clara had been avoiding. We've tried 4 towns. Nobody wants us. What makes you think the 5th will be different? I don't know. The admission hurt. But we'll figure it out. We always do. Margaret was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger. What if we didn't have to leave? What if we could stay? Clara's heart clenched. Margaret, I know what people are saying. I'm not stupid, but Mr. Calder's been good to us. Better than anyone since Papa died, and the boys are happy here. Even Emma's smiling again. Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. Would it be so terrible to just stay? It's not that simple. Why not? If he doesn't mind. Because it's not his reputation on the line. Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. It's mine, and yours, and your sister's. Because unmarried women living in men's houses get called names that stick, that follow you for the rest of your life. Because I won't trade your futures for temporary shelter, no matter how kind the man offering it. Margaret flinched, and Clara immediately regretted her tone. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. I know you like it here. I like it here too, but we can't build our lives on someone else's charity. We have to be able to stand on our own. We've been standing on our own for 3 months. Look where it got us. Margaret's voice broke slightly. Maybe it's okay to let someone help. Maybe we don't have to do everything alone. She disappeared inside before Clara could respond, leaving Clara alone with her daughter's words echoing in the dark. Maybe we don't have to do everything alone. But Clara had learned the price of dependence, had seen what happened when you built your life around someone else's strength. When Thomas died, everything had crumbled because she'd let herself rely on him, trust in him, believe that his presence was permanent. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Wouldn't let her children make it either. In 2 weeks, they'd leave. They'd find another town, another chance, another way forward. And this time, Clara would make sure they built something that couldn't be taken away by death, or lawyers, or men who saw widows as easy targets. But that night, lying in bed with Emma curled against her side, Clara let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if Margaret was right, if staying was possible, if this fragile peace could somehow last. Then she closed her eyes and reminded herself that peace was always temporary, that good fortune always had a price, and that in 2 weeks, they'd be gone anyway. It was better not to hope for anything else. The morning started like any other, with Clara at the stove frying eggs while her children gathered around the table and Luke came in from his early chores smelling of hay and livestock. But there was a tension in the air that Clara couldn't name, a weight pressing down that made her hands unsteady as she served breakfast. Creek's running high, Luke said, pouring himself coffee. All that rain we had last week. James, William, I'll need you boys to check the lower pasture fences this morning. Water gets much higher, it'll take out the posts. Yes, sir, James said, already halfway through his second helping of eggs. I'll come too, Daniel offered, eager as always to prove himself useful. Luke considered this, then nodded. All right. But you stay close to your brothers, and if the water looks dangerous, you back off. Understood? Understood. Clara felt Emma's small hand tug at her skirt. She looked down to find her youngest daughter's face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. What's wrong, sweetheart? Don't want the boys to go. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Water's bad. Clara knelt down, smoothing her daughter's hair. The water's just high, that's all. Your brothers know how to be careful. But Emma shook her head, her grip tightening. Water's bad. Please, Mama. It was probably nothing, just the lingering effects of a recent fever, the way illness could make children anxious and clingy. But Clara felt a chill run down her spine anyway, some maternal instinct that had kept her family alive through 3 months of catastrophe. Luke, she said quietly, maybe the boys should stay close to the house today. He looked at her, reading something in her expression. The fences need checking. I know, but Clara glanced at Emma, at the fear in her small face. Maybe just this once we could wait until tomorrow. Let the water settle. Luke's jaw tightened, and for a moment Clara thought he'd argue. Then he looked at Emma, at the way she pressed against Clara's legs, and his expression softened. Tomorrow then, he said. Boys, you can help me in the barn instead. There's tack that needs mending. The relief in Emma's face was so profound that Clara's chest ached. She picked up her daughter, held her close, and tried to ignore the voice in her head that said she was being ridiculous, that she was letting a sick child's fears dictate ranch work. By mid-morning, the sky had darkened with new clouds, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. Luke stood at the window, watching the weather roll in, his expression unreadable. Going to be a bad one, he said. I should check on the horses, make sure everything's secured. I'll come with you, Clara offered, but he shook his head. Stay with the kids. Keep them inside. If this turns into what I think it will, we'll be safer in the house. He disappeared into the rain, and Clara gathered her children, counting heads the way she'd done obsessively since leaving Redemption. 9. All present, all safe. The storm hit hard and fast, rain drumming against the roof like fists, wind howling around the corners of the house. The younger children huddled together near the stove while Margaret helped Clara prepare an early lunch, their movements quick and efficient in the gray light. Mama! Samuel stood at the window, his face pressed to the glass. The creek's overflowing. Clara joined him, looked out to see brown water spreading across the lower pasture, moving fast and angry. If the boys had been down there checking fences, she pushed the thought away, but her hands were shaking. Luke returned an hour later, soaked through, his face grim. Creek's taken out the bridge, won't be able to get to town until the water goes down. How long will that take? Day or two, maybe more, depending on how much rain we get. He stripped off his wet coat, accepted the towel Margaret handed him. We've got enough supplies to last a week if we're careful. Should be fine. But there was something in his tone that suggested otherwise, and Clara felt her anxiety ratchet higher. The storm lasted through the afternoon and into the evening, the rain relentless, the wind fierce enough to rattle the windows in their frames. The children grew restless, then frightened, then exhausted, falling asleep in piles around the front room while Clara and Luke sat at the kitchen table listening to the weather rage. Emma knew, Clara said quietly. This morning. Somehow she knew it would be dangerous. Luke wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. Children sense things sometimes, or maybe she just got lucky. Either way, if the boys had been down by that creek, Clara couldn't finish the sentence. But they weren't. They're safe. Everyone's safe. The reassurance should have helped, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was just the beginning, that something worse was coming. She was right. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and strangely silent. Clara woke to find Luke already gone, his side of the kitchen table empty, coffee cold in the pot. She checked on her children, found them all still sleeping, then went to the window. The creek had receded somewhat, but the damage was extensive. Fences down, debris scattered across the pastures, mud everywhere. And coming up the road, visible in the early light, were riders. Clara's heart dropped. She recognized the lead rider even at a distance. James Hartwick rode like a man who owned everything he surveyed, his posture arrogant even on horseback. Behind him were 4 other men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of people paid to enforce someone else's will. Clara ran to wake Margaret. "Get the children upstairs. Keep them quiet. Don't come down no matter what you hear." "Mama, what's happening?" "Just do it, please." She was back at the window when Luke emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work pants, his expression carefully neutral as he watched the riders approach. Clara wanted to go to him, to stand beside him, but something told her that would only make things worse. Hartwick reined in 20 feet from where Luke stood. Up close, Clara could see he'd aged since she'd last seen him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating, assessing everything for its value. "Luke Calder," Hartwick said, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Heard you've been harboring a fugitive." Clara's blood went cold. Fugitive. The word was a weapon, carefully chosen, designed to turn shelter into crime. "I've been providing work and wages to a woman and her children," Luke said evenly. "Nothing illegal about that." "Depends on the woman." Hartwick's gaze moved to the house, finding Clara in the window. His smile was sharp, triumphant. "Mrs. Hayes owes substantial debts. Debts her late husband incurred and she's legally responsible for. By hiding her, you're aiding in fraud." "That's a lie." Clara was moving before she realized it, out the door and onto the porch, fury overriding fear. "Thomas never owed you anything. You manufactured those debts, forged his signature, stole our land through fraud and bribery." "Careful, Mrs. Hayes." Hartwick's tone was almost gentle. "Accusations like that require proof. And you don't have any, do you?" "I have Thomas's ledgers. You have nothing that would stand up in court. I made sure of that." He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm willing to forget the debts. Let bygones be bygones, if you do something for me." Clara felt ice slide down her spine. "What?" "Convince Mr. Calder here to sell me his ranch. Fair price, clean transaction. You help me do that, and I'll consider your husband's debts paid in full." Luke's laugh was harsh and humorless. "This ranch isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mr. Calder. It's just a matter of price." Hartwick's smile widened. "And I think we both know that your current situation is complicated. Woman and 9 children, no legal arrangement, gossip spreading through 3 counties. The territorial judge is a personal friend of mine. 1 word from me, and those children get placed in separate homes. Is that what you want, Mrs. Hayes? Your family torn apart because you were too proud to help a man conduct legitimate business?" Clara couldn't breathe. The threat was laid out so casually, so matter-of-factly, like Hartwick was discussing the weather rather than destroying everything she had left. "Get off my property." Luke's voice was quiet but absolute. "Now." "I'll give you 1 week to reconsider." Hartwick remounted, gathering his reins. "After that, I filed the necessary papers with the judge. And Mrs. Hayes, when they come for your children, remember that you had a choice. You just made the wrong one." He rode away, his men following, leaving Clara standing on the porch with her world crumbling around her for the second time in 3 months. Luke reached her in 3 strides, his hand steady on her shoulders. "Breathe. Just breathe." "He'll do it." Clara heard the panic in her own voice, couldn't stop it. "He'll take my children. He has the connections, the money. He can make it legal, and there's nothing I can do to stop him." "There's always something you can do." "What? What can we possibly do against a man like that?" Clara's voice broke. "I've already lost everything once. I can't lose them. I can't." "You won't." Luke's certainty should have been impossible, but Clara heard the steel beneath it. "But we need to think. We need to plan." Inside, her children were gathering at the top of the stairs, their faces pale and frightened. Clara saw James's fists clenched, saw Margaret holding Emma, saw all of them looking to her for answers she didn't have. "Upstairs," she managed. "We'll talk about this upstairs." In the small bedroom where her children slept, Clara faced the reality she'd been avoiding for weeks. They couldn't run. Hartwick would find them. They couldn't hide. He had the law on his side. They couldn't fight. Not with lawyers and judges and legal mechanisms designed to favor men with money. We should just leave, William said, his young voice trying for brave and landing on scared. Go somewhere he can't find us. He'll find us? Margaret's tone was flat. Men like him always do. Then we give him what he wants. Daniel looked at Clara, his eyes old beyond his years. We convince Mr. Calder to sell. It's just land. It's not worth losing the family over. No. Luke spoke from the doorway where he'd been standing silent. I won't be threatened into selling my home. And even if I did, Hartwick would just find another way to hurt you. Men like him don't stop. They just escalate. Then what do we do? Catherine's voice was small, terrified. Clara looked at her 9 children, at their scared faces and thin shoulders, and the resilience that was starting to wear through. Looked at Luke, solid and steady in the doorway, refusing to bend, and felt something shift inside her, some fundamental change in perspective. She'd been running, hiding, trying to keep her family together through evasion and desperation. But maybe Margaret had been right. Maybe doing everything alone wasn't strength. Maybe it was just another form of surrender. We fight, Clara heard herself say. We find a way to prove Hartwick's fraud, to expose what he did, to get justice for Thomas and protection for all of us. With what? James asked. You said yourself the ledgers were gone, the papers were destroyed. The ledgers from our house were destroyed, but Thomas kept copies at his office in town. I never went back for them. I was too scared, too overwhelmed. But if they're still there, that's a 90-mile ride through territory Hartwick controls, Luke said quietly. And even if you found them, what makes you think anyone would believe them over his word? Because Thomas wasn't the only one he cheated. Clara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. When we were leaving Redemption, a woman stopped me. Emily Carson. She said her husband had died in a mining accident, and Hartwick had taken her claim the same way he took our land. Said there were others. If we could find them, get them to testify. They won't. Margaret's voice held bitter knowledge. They're scared, same as we were. Maybe they were, but maybe knowing they're not alone will change that. Clara looked at Luke. You said Hartwick's been consolidating property for years. How many families do you think he's destroyed? How many widows and desperate men has he squeezed dry? Luke's expression was thoughtful. Enough to make him very rich, and enough to make a lot of people very angry if they thought there was a chance of fighting back. There's your answer, then. Clara felt something like hope flicker in her chest. We don't fight him alone. We find everyone he's hurt, and we fight him together. The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Then James spoke up, his voice stronger than before. I'll ride to Redemption. Get the ledgers from Papa's office. No. Clara's response was immediate. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than losing everyone? James met her eyes steadily. I'm 16, Mama. Papa would have trusted me with this. You should too. Clara looked at her eldest son, saw Thomas in the set of his jaw, the determination in his eyes, saw the man he was becoming, and the boy he'd had to stop being too soon. Not alone, she said finally. Luke goes with you. I'll need someone to stay here, Luke said. Watch over the ranch and your family. I'll stay. William straightened his shoulders. I can handle it. You're 12, Margaret said. Old enough to shoot straight and watch for trouble. William looked at Luke. You taught me yourself, sir. Said I had a good eye. Luke nodded slowly. You do. But if anything looks wrong, anything at all, you get everyone into the house, bar the doors, and wait for us to come back. No heroics. No heroics, William agreed. Clara felt the plan taking shape, fragile but possible. James and Luke would ride to Redemption, retrieve the ledgers, and make contact with Emily Carson and anyone else who might be willing to testify. Margaret and Clara would stay at the ranch, protecting the younger children and maintaining the appearance of normal life. They had 6 days before Hartwick's deadline, 6 days to build a case strong enough to stop him. It wasn't enough time. It might be impossible, but it was something, and something was better than the nothing they'd had before. We start tomorrow, Clara said. Tonight, we prepare. Pack supplies for the ride, write down everything we remember about Thomas's business dealings, make a list of people in Redemption who might be willing to help. She looked around at her children's faces, saw fear mixing with determination. This is dangerous. Hartwick won't like being challenged, but if we do this right, if we're careful and smart and brave, we might finally get the justice Thomas deserved. And if we fail? Grace asked in a small voice. Clara knelt down, took her daughter's hands. Then at least we'll fail fighting instead of running, and sometimes that makes all the difference. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with Luke, making lists and plans while her children slept upstairs. The house was quiet except for the scratch of pencil on paper and the tick of the clock on the mantel. "This might not work," Luke said quietly. "Even if we get the ledgers, even if we find people willing to testify, Hartwick has judges and lawyers on his payroll. The system is designed to protect men like him." "I know." Clara set down her pencil, rubbed her tired eyes. "But I have to try. If I don't, if I just let him take my children without fighting, I'll never forgive myself." "You wouldn't be letting him. You'd be making the smart choice, keeping them safe." "Safe?" Clara heard the bitterness in her own laugh. "They won't be safe scattered across different families, torn away from each other, raised by strangers. They'll be broken, and I'd rather die fighting than watch that happen." Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. "When Sarah died, when I lost the baby, I told myself I was done. Done hoping, done planning, done imagining any future beyond the next day's work." He looked at Clara directly. "Then you showed up on that road with your 9 children, half dead from thirst and sun, and you still had fire in your eyes, still had fight. I'd forgotten what that looked like." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I don't feel very fierce right now." "You are, though. Fierce enough to walk 90 miles with children in tow. Fierce enough to stand up to men with power and money. Fierce enough to look at impossible odds and decide to fight anyway." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "That's worth fighting for. Worth protecting." The touch was simple, almost brotherly, but Clara felt the weight of it, the promise implicit in the gesture, the alliance being offered. "We're not married," she said quietly. "We're not even courting. If Hartwick pushes this, if it goes to court, they'll use that against us. Against you. Let them." "Luke, I mean it." His hand tightened on hers. "I don't care what people say. I don't care about my reputation or propriety or any of the social rules that say a man can't help a woman without demanding something in return. You and your children need protection, and I can provide it. That's all that matters. It matters legally. Hartwick was right about that much. Unmarried woman, unmarried man, 9 children. The judge will see impropriety whether it exists or not." Luke's jaw set. "Then we make it proper." Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me." The words came out flat, practical, like he was proposing a business arrangement rather than a life partnership. Not for love or romance or any of the usual reasons. For protection. For your children's safety. For legal standing that even Hartwick can't easily challenge. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage. To a man she'd known for barely 3 weeks. A man who'd shown her nothing but kindness and asked for nothing in return. A marriage of convenience, of survival, of 2 broken people trying to shield children from a cruel world. "That's not fair to you," she managed. "Fair?" Luke's laugh was harsh. "Nothing about this is fair, but marriage gives us legal protection. It makes you and your children my legal responsibility. It makes this house your legal home, and it makes it a hell of a lot harder for Hartwick to claim impropriety or take custody of your kids. And after, when this is over, when Hartwick is dealt with, after you decide. You want to stay, you stay. You want to leave, you leave. But at least your children will be safe and you'll have legal standing to protect them." It made terrible, perfect sense. A marriage on paper, a shield against the legal mechanisms Hartwick could wield. Not love, not partnership, just survival dressed up in legal language. "I can't ask you to do this," Clara said. "You're not asking, I'm offering." Luke's eyes were steady, certain. "And I'm saying I want all of you, Clara, you and your 9 children, with all the complications and chaos and noise that comes with it. Not because I'm looking to replace what I lost, but because you're here and you need help, and I can give it. Clara thought about Thomas, about the marriage they'd had, built on love and partnership and shared dreams. Thought about what she was being offered now, safety purchased through legal contract, protection without pretense of romance. They were nothing alike. But maybe that was the point. If we do this, Clara said slowly, we do it honestly. No lies about love or happy endings. We protect the children, we fight Hartwick, and when it's over, we reassess. Agreed. And if you ever want out, if this becomes too much, I won't. Luke's voice was absolute. I've thought this through, Clara. I know what I'm offering, and I'm not the kind of man who goes back on his word. Clara looked at him, this stranger who'd become an ally, this quiet rancher who'd offered her family everything when the world had offered nothing. Looked at her children sleeping upstairs, innocent and vulnerable and depending on her to keep them safe. The mathematics were brutal but simple. Married, they had legal standing. Unmarried, they had nothing but Hartwick's mercy, and men like Hartwick didn't know the meaning of the word. All right, Clara said. Yes, I'll marry you. Luke nodded once, accepting her answer like it was the most natural thing in the world. We'll do it tomorrow, before James and I leave for redemption. The circuit preacher is due through town in the morning. If we ride out at first light, we can catch him. That fast? Hartwick gave us a week. We don't have time for long engagements. Clara almost laughed at the absurdity of it. From proposal to wedding in less than 12 hours, marrying a man she barely knew to protect children from a system designed to tear families apart. It should have felt wrong, desperate, like surrender. Instead, it felt like the first smart decision she'd made in months. Tomorrow then, she said. But first, I need to tell the children. She climbed the stairs, found Margaret still awake, sitting by the window in the moonlight. You heard, Clara said quietly. I heard. Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. Are you sure about this, Mama? No, but I'm sure about keeping you all together. And if marriage is what it takes, then that's what I'll do. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Do you love him? The question was simple, the answer complicated. I respect him, Clara said carefully. I trust him, as much as I'm capable of trusting anyone right now. And I believe he'll keep his word. That's more than most women get in a marriage. Papa loved you. Yes, he did. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. And I loved him. But this isn't that kind of marriage, Margaret. This is survival. It's protection. It's doing whatever necessary to keep our family whole. Margaret nodded slowly, understanding in a way that broke Clara's heart. Her daughter was too young to understand marriage as strategy, too old not to recognize necessity. The others will have questions, Margaret said. Then we'll answer them honestly. All of this, the marriage, the fight against Hartwick, the risk, it's for them. They deserve to know why. In the morning, with the sun just breaking over the hills, Clara stood in her borrowed dress in a small church in the nearest town and married Luke Calder in front of a handful of witnesses and 9 confused children. The ceremony was brief, the vows practical, the kiss perfunctory. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Clara felt no surge of emotion, no certainty that she'd made the right choice. Just a quiet settling, like a piece clicking into place in a larger puzzle she couldn't yet see the shape of. Well, Luke said as they walked out of the church into the bright morning. That's done. That's done, Clara agreed. And then they rode home to their ranch, their children, and the fight that was still waiting for them. They had 4 days left when Luke and James rode out for redemption, the morning mist still clinging to the valley floor. Clara stood on the porch watching them go, her wedding ring, a simple band Luke had procured from the general store, unfamiliar and heavy on her finger. Margaret stood beside her, holding Emma, while the rest of the children scattered to their morning chores with forced normalcy. They'll be all right, Margaret said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. They will, Clara agreed, because there was no other acceptable answer. The first day passed in tense quiet. Clara threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing cupboards that were already orderly, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. William took his guardian duties seriously, checking the property line every few hours, watching the road with the vigilance of a soldier on picket duty. The second day brought visitors. Claire was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon approaching, looked up to see a woman she didn't recognize driving a buckboard with two children in the back. The woman was perhaps 40, weathered and thin, with the particular hardness that came from years of struggle. "Mrs. Calder?" The woman's voice was hesitant, uncertain. The name still felt foreign, but Clara nodded. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I'm Emily Carson." The woman climbed down from the wagon, her movements stiff. "We met in Redemption just before you left. I told you about my husband, about what James Hartwick did to us." Clara's heart kicked hard. "I remember. Word travels fast in these parts. Heard you married Luke Calder. Heard you're planning to stand up to Hartwick." Emily's eyes were sharp, assessing. Wanted to know if that was true, or if it was just talk. Clara set down her laundry basket, gave Emily her full attention. "It's true. My son and my husband are in Redemption right now, retrieving records that prove Hartwick's fraud. We're building a case against him." "And you think you can win?" "I think we have to try." Emily was quiet for a moment, her jaw working. Then she reached into her wagon, pulled out a leather satchel, and handed it to Clara. "My husband kept records too. Every transaction, every deal, every promise Hartwick made. When he died and Hartwick came for our claim, I hid these. Figured they wouldn't do me any good alone. But if there were others..." She trailed off, hope and fear warring in her expression. "If you're really doing this, I want to help." Clara opened the satchel, saw pages and pages of careful documentation, dates, amounts, signatures, evidence, real tangible proof of Hartwick's systematic theft. "How many others are there?" Clara asked quietly. "How many people has he done this to?" "In Redemption alone? At least a dozen that I know of." "Across the territory?" Emily shook her head. "Could be 50, could be 100. Hartwick's been operating for nearly a decade, and he's not the only one. His partners, men like Hartwell, they've got the same system running in other districts." Clara felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, not just her own fight for justice, but dozens of families, hundreds of people, all of them victims of a system designed to protect predators. "If we do this," Clara said slowly, "if we really challenge him, it won't just be about getting our land back. It'll be about breaking the whole operation." "I know." Emily's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "And I know what that means. Hartwick will come after anyone who stands against him. He'll use every tool he has, the courts, the law, violence if he has to. Are you prepared for that?" Clara thought about her 9 children, about Thomas's death, about 3 months of running and hiding and watching her family slowly break. Thought about the marriage certificate now filed in the county records, about Luke riding into dangerous territory to retrieve evidence, about all the gambles she'd already taken just to get this far. "I don't know if I'm prepared," Clara said honestly, "but I know I'm done being afraid." Emily smiled, the expression transforming her worn face. "Then you'll have my testimony, and I'll help you find the others. There's a meeting house in Redemption, old mining hall, that's been abandoned for years. If you can get word out, if you can convince people there's a real chance of winning, they'll come." "How do I convince them when I'm not even convinced myself?" "You show them they're not alone. You show them the evidence, and you show them that someone finally has the courage to fight." Emily's eyes were fierce. "People are tired, Mrs. Calder. Tired of being cheated, tired of watching powerful men destroy lives without consequence. Give them a target and a plan, and they'll fight." After Emily left, Clara sat on the porch with the satchel in her lap, her mind racing. They had evidence now, more than she'd hoped for. But evidence meant nothing without people willing to testify, and testimony meant nothing if the judge was already in Hartwick's pocket. "Mama?" William appeared beside her, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Was that good news or bad news?" "Good, I think." Clara looked at her 12-year-old son, standing guard over his family with a weapon he barely knew how to use, and felt pride and heartbreak in equal measure. "We might actually have a chance at this." "Then why do you look so worried?" Because chance wasn't certainty, and fighting back meant exposing her children to even more danger. Because every step forward felt like walking deeper into a trap she couldn't see. Because she'd married a man she barely knew and sent her eldest son into hostile territory and bet everything on a stack of old papers and the hope that justice might actually exist. Because winning would be a miracle, Clara said, and I'm not sure I believe in miracles anymore. William sat down beside her, his young face serious. Papa used to say miracles were just hard work that looked like luck. Maybe we just have to work hard enough. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. When did you get so wise? Had to grow up fast? William's voice cracked slightly, betraying his age. We all did. She pulled him close, this boy trying so hard to be a man, and let herself have one moment of weakness before she had to be strong again. The third day brought a storm, not of weather, but of fear. Clara woke before dawn to find Margaret standing at the window, her face pale in the moonlight. They should be back by now, Margaret said without preamble. They've been gone 3 days. It's a 2-day ride. Something's wrong. Clara had been thinking the same thing, had spent the previous night lying awake running through scenarios, each more terrible than the last, but she couldn't let Margaret see that fear. Could be a dozen reasons they're delayed. Bad weather, trouble with the horses, maybe they found more evidence and stayed to gather it. Or maybe Hartwick found them. Margaret's voice was flat. Maybe he hurt them. Maybe they're not coming back. Don't. Clara crossed to her daughter, took her shoulders. Don't go there. Luke knows what he's doing, and James is smart. They'll come back. You don't know that. No, but I have to believe it because the alternative is unacceptable. Margaret's composure cracked, tears spilling over. I can't lose anyone else, Mama. I can't lose James, too. Clara held her daughter while she cried, stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances she didn't quite believe. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, indifferent to human suffering. By mid-morning, Clara had organized the younger children into normal routines. Lessons for the littlest ones, chores for the older ones, anything to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But she felt the tension in the house, the way everyone kept glancing at the road, waiting for riders who didn't come. When the sound of hoofbeats finally reached them, near noon, Clara felt her heart stop. She moved to the window, looked out, and saw Luke and James, both mounted, both alive, both riding hard toward the house like something was chasing them. Clara was out the door before she realized she'd moved, running toward them with Margaret close behind. Luke pulled up short, swung down from his saddle, and Clara saw the blood on his shirt, the way he favored his left side. What happened? Her voice came out sharp with fear. We got the ledgers. Luke's voice was rough with pain and exhaustion. And we got noticed doing it. Hartwick's men caught up with us about 20 miles out, tried to take the documents by force. You're hurt. Bullet grazed my ribs. I've had worse. He pulled a wrapped package from his saddlebag, handed it to Clara. Everything's here. Thomas's records, witness lists, transaction logs. It's all there. Clara took the package with shaking hands, looked at James, who was dismounting slowly, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with something like triumph. We did it, Mama, James said. We really did it. And there's more. We talked to people in Redemption. Emily Carson spread the word, and people are willing to testify. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow night at the old mining hall. Everyone who's been cheated by Hartwick, they're all coming. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of fear loosening slightly. How many people? 20, maybe 30 families. James's voice shook with the magnitude of it. All of them ready to fight. Margaret had reached them now, was checking James for injuries with rough, anxious hands. You're all right? You're not hurt? I'm fine. Mr. Calder took the hit for me, literally. James looked at Luke with something close to worship. He got between me and the shooter, made sure I got away with the documents. Clara turned to Luke, saw him wince as he pressed a hand to his side, saw the blood seeping through his fingers despite his attempts to minimize the injury. Inside, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Now. She spent the next hour tending to Luke's wound, cleaning and bandaging the bullet graze while he sat stoically at the kitchen table and pretended it didn't hurt. The bullet had carved a furrow across his ribs, deep enough to bleed freely but not deep enough to be truly dangerous. Still, Clara's hands shook as she worked, thinking about how close they'd come to losing him. "You should have been more careful," she said, her voice tight. "I was careful. Careful enough to keep your son alive and get the evidence back." Luke caught her wrist gently. "This is what fighting looks like, Clara. It's messy and dangerous and people get hurt. But we got what we needed." "At what cost? A scratch? Nothing more?" His eyes met hers steadily. "I told you I'd protect your children. I meant it." Clara finished the bandaging in silence, her mind already moving ahead to the next crisis. Hartwick knew they had the documents now. He knew people were organizing. He'd escalate, try to stop them before the meeting could happen. "We need to move fast," she said. "If we're doing this, we do it tomorrow. Get everyone together, present the evidence, file charges before Hartwick can prepare a defense. The meeting's already set for tomorrow night, but we'll need to get the documents to a lawyer who isn't in Hartwick's pocket, someone who can file the proper claims." "Do you know anyone like that?" Luke nodded slowly. "There's a circuit lawyer, comes through these parts every few weeks. Name's Harrison. He's got a reputation for taking on cases the other lawyers won't touch. Last I heard, he was in Millerville, about 30 miles east. Then we ride to Millerville. Today. Now." Clara looked at Luke's bandaged side. "Except you're staying here. You're in no condition to ride." "I'm fine. You're bleeding through the bandage already. You ride 30 miles, that wound opens up, and you're no good to anyone." Clara's voice was firm. "I'll go. I'll take the documents. I'll find Harrison, and I'll get this process started." "You can't go alone." "I'll take Margaret. She can handle herself." Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara saw the moment he recognized the futility of it. She'd made her decision, and nothing he said would change it. "Take William, too," he said finally. "3 is safer than 2, and take my rifle. If Hartwick's men are watching the roads, they won't see us coming." Clara was already moving, gathering supplies, checking ammunition. "We'll take the old mining trail, come at Millerville from the north. It's longer but less traveled." Within an hour, Clara was mounted with Margaret and William, the precious documents secured in her saddlebag, Luke's rifle across her lap. She looked back at the ranch house, at Luke standing on the porch with the younger children gathered around him, and felt the weight of what they were attempting. "If we're not back by morning," she told him, "take the children and go. Get them somewhere safe, and don't look back." "We'll be here when you return," Luke said with absolute certainty. "All of us." The ride to Millerville was tense and silent, each of them watching for pursuit, for signs of Hartwick's men. But the trail stayed empty, the landscape peaceful, and by late afternoon they were descending into the small mining town tucked between 2 hills. Finding Harrison was easier than Clara expected. The lawyer kept an office above the general store, a cramped room stuffed with books and papers and the accumulated chaos of a man who cared more about justice than organization. He was younger than Clara expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. "Mrs. Calder," he said when she introduced herself, and the name still felt foreign on her tongue. "I've heard your name recently. Word is you're planning to challenge James Hartwick. Word travels fast. In cases like this, it does. Hartwick's been squeezing people for years. A lot of folks would like to see him fall." Harrison gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "But wanting and achieving are different things. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed?" Clara pulled out the documents, laid them on his desk. "Because I have proof. Transaction records, witness testimony, documented evidence of systematic fraud and land theft. And I have 30 families willing to testify." Harrison's eyebrows rose. He pulled the documents closer, began reading, his expression growing more intense with each page. The silence stretched for long minutes while he examined everything, cross-referencing dates, checking signatures, making notes in his cramped handwriting. Finally, he looked up. "This is extraordinary. If even half of this holds up in court, Hartwick is finished. But you understand what you're up against. He has connections, money, judges who owe him favors." "I understand, but we can't let that stop us." "And you're prepared for the consequences? Hartwick won't go down quietly. He'll use every tool at his disposal, legal and otherwise, to crush this before it gains traction." Clara thought about Thomas, about 3 months of running, about her children's faces when Hartwick had threatened to take them away. Thought about the marriage certificate that gave her legal standing and the man who'd taken a bullet to protect her son. I'm prepared, she said quietly, and I'm not alone anymore. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll file the claims first thing tomorrow morning. Fraud, theft, conspiracy to defraud. I'll also request an emergency injunction to prevent Hartwick from selling or transferring any disputed properties until the cases are resolved. He began organizing the documents into careful stacks. But filing is just the beginning. We'll need depositions from every witness. We'll need to establish a timeline of Hartwick's activities, and we'll need to find a judge who isn't in his pocket. The circuit judge is Hartwick's cousin. Harrison's tone was dry. But there's a territorial judge who'll be in the capital next week, Judge Morrison. He's known for being incorruptible, which in this territory is saying something. If we can get this case before him, we have a real chance. Clara felt hope flutter in her chest, dangerous and intoxicating. What do you need from us? Get everyone to the meeting tomorrow. I'll be there. We'll organize testimonies, gather statements, build an ironclad case. Harrison met her eyes seriously. And Mrs. Calder? Be careful. Hartwick's going to hear about this, probably already has. The next few days are going to be the most dangerous. They rode back in the dark, pushing the horses as fast as they dared, watching shadows for threats that never materialized. By the time they reached the ranch, near midnight, Clara was exhausted and wired with adrenaline in equal measure. Luke was waiting on the porch, his face tight with worry until he saw them. Any trouble? None. Harrison took the case. He's filing charges tomorrow morning. Clara dismounted, her legs shaky from hours in the saddle. We did it, Luke. We actually did it. First step, Luke said, but there was something like pride in his voice. Still a long way to go. Inside, the younger children were asleep, but Clara found James and Daniel waiting up in the kitchen. The moment they saw her, the relief on their faces made her throat tight. Mama, James's voice cracked. We were worried. I know, but we're all right. And tomorrow, we finish this. She gathered her children, held them close, and let herself believe just for a moment that justice might actually be possible. The fourth day dawned clear and cold, and with it came the final confrontation Clara had been dreading. She was making breakfast when she heard the horses, many horses, approaching fast. Luke was beside her in an instant, his rifle in hand, his face grim. Get the children upstairs, he said quietly. Bar the door. But Clara looked out the window and saw not Hartwick's men, but something far more surprising. Wagons and riders, dozens of them, all converging on the ranch house. She recognized Emily Carson in the lead wagon, saw other faces from Redemption, saw people she'd never met but who had the same hard-won determination in their eyes. They came early, Clara breathed. They all came. She went out to meet them, Luke beside her, and found herself facing a crowd of maybe 40 people, men, women, even some older children, all of them victims of Hartwick's system, all of them done running. We heard Harrison took the case, Emily said, climbing down from her wagon. Figured we'd come here, stand together, make sure Hartwick knows he's not just fighting one family anymore. A man Clara didn't recognize stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Name's Robert Chen. Hartwick took my mine 3 years ago, claimed my partner had sold his share to cover debts. I've been waiting for a chance to fight back ever since. More voices joined in, each telling a story of loss and theft and systematic destruction. Clara listened to them all, felt the weight of their collective grief and rage, and understood that this had stopped being about her family alone. This was about breaking a system that protected predators and punished victims, about proving that ordinary people could stand against power and greed and corruption, about creating a world where widows and orphans weren't easy targets for men with lawyers and judges in their pockets. Hartwick's deadline is today, Clara said when the stories had finally run out. He'll come here expecting me to convince Luke to sell. When he sees all of you instead, when he learns we've filed charges, he's going to react badly. Let him, Robert Chen said, his voice hard. We've all been reacting to him for years. Time he got a taste of what it feels like to be cornered. Clara looked at Luke, saw him nod slowly. Then we make our stand here, all of us together. They spent the day preparing, not for violence, though everyone was armed, but for testimony. Harrison arrived mid-morning with a stenographer, and they began the painstaking process of documenting every theft, every fraud, every abuse of power. Page after page of testimony, names and dates and amounts, building a case so comprehensive that even a corrupt judge would have trouble dismissing it. Clara watched her children move among the crowd, serving coffee and food, listening to stories, beginning to understand that they were part of something larger than their own survival. Saw James talking seriously with Robert Chen about mining operations. Saw Margaret comforting a woman whose husband had died in suspicious circumstances. Saw even little Emma bringing water to an elderly man whose hands shook too badly to hold the cup steady. This was what community looked like, Clara realized. Not perfect strangers united by blood or geography, but imperfect people united by shared struggle and common cause. When Hartwick finally arrived near sunset, he found not a desperate widow, but an army of the dispossessed, all of them standing on Luke Calder's property, all of them armed with proof of his crimes. Clara watched him rein in his horse, saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the situation, saw the exact moment he understood that the game had changed. "This is private property," Hartwick said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "You're all trespassing." "They're my guests," Luke said evenly, "and they're staying as long as they want." "Then you're harboring fugitives and accomplices to fraud." "No." Harrison stepped forward, legal documents in hand. "They're witnesses in a criminal case against you, Mr. Hartwick. Fraud, theft, conspiracy, extortion, and about a dozen other charges that have been filed with the territorial court as of this morning. Judge Morrison will be hearing the case next week." Hartwick's face went pale, then red. "Morrison has no jurisdiction here." "Actually, he does. Territorial crimes cross county lines, which puts them under territorial jurisdiction." Harrison's smile was sharp. "You should know that. You've been operating across multiple counties for years." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Clara watched Hartwick's hand move toward his gun, watched Luke's rifle come up in response, watched 40 witnesses ready themselves for violence that would destroy everything they'd built. "Don't," Clara said quietly, stepping between them. "You shoot anyone here. You've got 40 witnesses who'll testify. You try to bribe or threaten your way out of this, Morrison will hear about it. You've lost, Hartwick. The question is whether you accept it with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you make it worse for yourself." Hartwick's eyes burned with rage, but Clara saw fear beneath it. The fear of a man who'd built an empire on other people's suffering, watching it all crumble. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking. "Yes," Clara said, "it is." He rode away with his men, leaving behind a crowd that erupted in cautious celebration. But Clara felt no triumph, only exhaustion and the fragile hope that maybe, finally, they'd turned a corner. Luke found her on the porch as the sun set, watching the crowd below organize camping arrangements for the night, planning the journey to the capital for the trial. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," Clara corrected. "All of us." He was quiet for a moment, his shoulder warm against hers. "What happens after? When this is settled and Hartwick is dealt with?" Clara thought about the marriage certificate, about the practical arrangement they'd made, about the way her children had started calling him Sir instead of Mr. Calder, the way she'd stopped flinching when he stood too close. "I don't know," she said honestly. "We said we'd reassess when it was over." "And?" Clara looked at him, this steady, quiet man who'd offered shelter when she had nothing, who'd taken a bullet for her son, who'd stood beside her against impossible odds without asking for anything in return. "And I think," she said slowly, "that maybe we should see what happens when we're not just surviving, when we can actually build something instead of just fighting to keep it." Luke's hand found hers, his calloused fingers threading through hers. "I'd like that." Below them, her children were helping set up tents and start cooking fires, part of a community that had formed from shared pain and common purpose. Above them, stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, indifferent and eternal. And for the first time since Thomas died, Clara let herself believe that the future might hold something other than struggle and loss. That maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth keeping. The journey to the territorial capital took 3 days, a caravan of wagons and riders stretching along the mountain roads like a slow-moving river of determination. Clara rode beside Luke, watching her children scattered among the other families, listening to the conversations that wove between the travelers. Stories of loss, yes, but also of hope, of the possibility that justice might actually exist for people like them. On the second night, camped beside a creek, with firelight dancing across tired faces, Emily Carson sat down beside Clara with 2 cups of coffee. "Never thought I'd see this many people willing to stand up to Hartwick," Emily said quietly. "For years, we all suffered alone, thinking we were the only ones. That isolation was his real weapon." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling the truth of it. "He counted on us being too scared and scattered to fight back. But desperation makes people brave in ways power can't predict." "Is that what you are? Desperate and brave?" Clara thought about the question, about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, broken and running with 9 children and no hope. Thought about the woman she'd become, married to a man she was just beginning to understand, leading a movement she'd never intended to start. "I'm a mother protecting her children," Clara said finally. "Everything else just follows from that." Emily smiled. "Hartwick made a mistake when he threatened to take your kids. Turned out you had teeth after all." They rode into the capital on the 3rd day, the territorial seat sprawling before them with its stone courthouse and government buildings, its wide streets and permanent structures that spoke of civilization and order. Clara felt her stomach tighten as they approached the courthouse steps, where Harrison waited with his arms full of legal documents. "Judge Morrison agreed to hear the case today," Harrison said without preamble. "He's reviewed the preliminary evidence and wants to proceed immediately. That's good and bad. Good because it means he takes this seriously. Bad because we don't have much time to prepare our witnesses." "How many can testify?" Clara asked. "In one day? Maybe 10, if we're efficient. I've selected the strongest cases, people with clear documentation, credible stories, losses that represent the full scope of Hartwick's operation." Harrison looked at Clara directly. "You'll go first. Your husband's death, the theft of your property, the threat to your children, it establishes the pattern and the stakes." Clara's mouth went dry. She'd imagined this moment, prepared for it, but facing the reality of standing before a judge and reliving Thomas's death, their destruction, made her hands shake. "I'll be right there," Luke said quietly beside her. "The whole time." "You can't be in the courtroom during testimony," Harrison said. "Conflict of interest since you're married to the plaintiff. But you can wait outside and you'll testify yourself about Hartwick's threats and the attempted theft of your property." Luke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Clara felt his hand squeeze hers once, briefly, before he stepped back to give her space. The courtroom was smaller than Clara expected, wood-paneled and austere, with high windows that let in cold morning light. Judge Morrison sat behind an elevated bench, an older man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Hartwick sat at the defendant's table with 2 expensive lawyers, his face carefully neutral, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders. Harrison led her through her testimony with patient precision. She spoke about Thomas, about their life in redemption, about the day he'd fallen to his death, and how quickly Hartwick had appeared with his forged documents and legal claims. Her voice shook when she described watching her children go hungry, when she recounted the long walk through the desert heat, when she repeated Hartwick's threat to take her children away. Hartwick's lawyer tried to shake her story during cross-examination, suggesting she was a vindictive widow, looking for someone to blame for her husband's poor business decisions. But Clara had lived through too much to be intimidated by legal tactics. "My husband kept meticulous records," she said evenly. "Every transaction documented, every debt accounted for. Those records prove he owed Mr. Hartwick nothing. The documents Mr. Hartwick produced were forgeries designed to steal our property." "You're accusing my client of fraud based on records that conveniently disappeared?" "They didn't disappear. They were stolen from my home the same night your client filed his claim. But my husband kept copies at his business office. Those copies are now part of the evidence before this court." The lawyer's expression flickered, just for a moment, and Clara knew she'd landed the blow. The testimony continued through the morning and into the afternoon. Robert Chen described losing his mind to fabricated partnership disputes. Emily Carson explained how her husband's accidental death had been followed within days by Hartwick's claim on their property. A farmer named Jacob Miller recounted being forced to sign over his land to cover medical debts that Hartwick had purchased from the town doctor specifically to gain leverage. Each story followed the same pattern: death or disaster, followed immediately by Hartwick's appearance with legal documents and sympathetic words about helping people through difficult times, followed by the systematic theft of everything they'd built. By late afternoon, even Judge Morrison's neutral expression had hardened into something that looked like anger. "Mr. Hartwick," the judge said when the last witness had finished, "do you wish to offer testimony in your own defense?" Hartwick stood slowly, his expensive suit immaculate, his posture confident despite the mounting evidence against him. "Your Honor, I'm a businessman. I've engaged in dozens of legitimate transactions over the years. If some of those transactions resulted in people losing property, that's unfortunate but entirely legal. I have documentation for every claim. Documentation that's remarkably similar across dozens of unrelated cases," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Same language, same legal structures, even the same handwriting on many of the signatures, despite supposedly coming from different people." "Your Honor, I object to this characterization," Hartwick's lawyer began, but Morrison raised his hand. "Save it for your closing arguments. Right now, I want to hear from Mr. Hartwick himself." The judge leaned forward. "Did you or did you not systematically target widows and desperate individuals for the purpose of acquiring their property below market value through fraudulent documentation?" The courtroom went silent. Clara held her breath, watching Hartwick's face cycle through calculation and rage before settling on injured dignity. "I helped people in crisis," he said carefully. "If they later regretted their decisions, that's hardly my fault." "So you're claiming every single one of these transactions, 37 separate cases with remarkably similar patterns, was legitimate?" "I'm claiming that my business practices are legal and above reproach." Judge Morrison leaned back, his expression unreadable. "We'll see about that. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when I'll hear closing arguments and deliver my verdict." The crowd filed out slowly, tension and hope mixing in the cold evening air. Clara found Luke waiting on the courthouse steps, surrounded by her children who'd been watching from the gallery. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. The evidence is strong, but Hartwick's lawyers are good. And the judge—" Clara shook her head. "I can't read him." "He was angry," Margaret said. "I could see it when that farmer was testifying. The judge was angry." "Angry doesn't mean he'll rule in our favor," Clara said, but she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. That night, they camped on the outskirts of the Capitol, the community of victims and witnesses gathering around fires to wait for morning. Clara sat with Luke slightly apart from the others, watching Emma sleep peacefully against Margaret's shoulder. "What happens if we lose?" Clara asked the question she'd been avoiding all day. "We don't lose." "But if we do? If Morrison rules in Hartwick's favor, what then?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Then we appeal. Take it to federal court if we have to, but we don't give up. We might not have a choice. If Hartwick wins, he'll come after everyone who testified. He'll destroy what little we have left." "He'll try," Luke agreed, "but he'll have a harder time with all of us together than he did when we were scattered and afraid." Clara looked at the fires, at the families gathered in shared purpose, and felt something shift in her understanding. Win or lose tomorrow, they'd already accomplished something Hartwick couldn't undo. They'd proven that ordinary people could organize, could stand up to power, could refuse to be victims anymore. "I never thanked you," she said quietly, "for all of this, for taking us in, for protecting my children, for risking everything to help us fight. You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. Because you didn't have to do any of it. We were strangers, and you gave us everything." Luke's hand found hers in the darkness. "You weren't strangers for long. And you gave me something too, a reason to care about tomorrow instead of just surviving today." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This marriage, this arrangement we made, it was supposed to be practical, temporary. "I know. I don't think I want it to be temporary anymore." Luke's fingers tightened on hers. "Good, because neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fires burn down to embers, until Emma stirred and Clara had to help her daughter settle back to sleep. But she carried Luke's words with her into the night, a promise of something beyond survival, beyond fighting, beyond just holding on. Morning came too fast and too slow, the hours crawling as they waited for court to reconvene. The minutes racing as Clara tried to prepare herself for either outcome. Judge Morrison took his seat exactly at 9 o'clock, his expression giving nothing away. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented yesterday," he began without preamble. "I've also taken the liberty of conducting some independent investigation into Mr. Hartwick's business practices and legal history." Hartwick's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's highly irregular." "Sit down, counselor. I'm a territorial judge with broad investigative authority. I'll conduct my hearings however I see fit." Morrison's voice was steel. "As I was saying, my investigation revealed a pattern of behavior spanning nearly a decade. 37 documented cases of property acquisition following deaths or disasters, with remarkable consistency in timing, documentation, and outcome." Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I find," Morrison continued, "that the evidence presented demonstrates clear and systematic fraud. Mr. Hartwick has engaged in a deliberate scheme to defraud vulnerable individuals of their property through forged documents, manufactured debts, and exploitation of legal processes designed to protect rather than prey upon the bereaved and desperate." The courtroom erupted in gasps and scattered applause. Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! I'm not finished." He waited until silence fell again. "James Hartwick, you are hereby ordered to return all property acquired through fraudulent means to its rightful owners or their heirs. Where property has been sold to third parties, you will provide fair market compensation. Additionally, you will pay restitution to each victim for damages incurred, amounts to be determined in individual hearings." Hartwick was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. I have connections. You have a choice," Morrison interrupted. "Accept this ruling and begin making restitution, or face criminal prosecution for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. I've already forwarded my findings to the territorial prosecutor. Whether this remains a civil matter or becomes criminal is entirely up to you." The fight went out of Hartwick like air from a punctured bladder. He sank back into his chair, his expensive lawyers whispering urgently in his ears. And Clara watched a decade of predatory business practices collapse in the span of a single morning. "For Mrs. Clara Calder," Morrison said, and Clara's heart jumped at hearing her married name in this context. "I'm ordering the immediate return of all property seized from her late husband's estate, plus compensation for 3 months of displacement and suffering. The total comes to," he consulted his notes, "approximately $3,000 in property value plus $500 in damages." Claire couldn't breathe. $3,000. Her land, her home, everything Thomas had built, returned. "Court is adjourned. Mr. Hartwick, you have 30 days to begin restitution proceedings. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges and seizure of all your remaining assets." Morrison's gavel fell one final time, and the courtroom exploded into celebration. Clara sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Around her, people were crying, laughing, embracing. Emily Carson pulled her into a fierce hug. Robert Chen was shaking Harrison's hand with tears streaming down his weathered face. And through it all, Clara felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching someone else's victory. Then Luke was there, pulling her to her feet, his arms around her, and everything suddenly became real. "We won," she whispered against his chest. "We actually won." "You won. You did this. We did this." Clara pulled back enough to see his face. "All of us together." Her children found them on the courthouse steps, all 9 of them talking over each other in their excitement. James was explaining the legal implications to William with an authority that made Clara's heart swell. Margaret was crying openly, her usual composure shattered by relief. Even Emma was laughing, caught up in the joy without fully understanding its source. "Does this mean we get our house back?" Catherine asked. "Our real house?" Clara looked at Luke, saw the question in his eyes. They could return to Redemption now, reclaim the property Thomas had built, go back to the life they'd had before everything fell apart. "We could," Clara said slowly. "The land is ours again." "But?" Margaret heard what Clara wasn't saying. Clara thought about the ranch, about the garden she'd restored and the house she'd cleaned and the rhythms they'd established over the past month. Thought about Luke teaching her sons carpentry and ranching, about the bedroom where her children finally slept peacefully, about the community they'd built fighting together. But I'm not sure I want to, Clara admitted. The ranch feels like home now. And the house in Redemption, it's full of memories, some good, many painful. I'm not sure going back is what's best for us. So what do we do with it? James asked. Luke spoke up quietly. You could sell it. Use the money to improve the ranch, add on to the house so everyone has proper rooms. Maybe buy some cattle, expand the operation. He paused. Or you could keep it, let someone else work the land, collect rent, have options for the future. Clara looked at her children, saw them considering the possibilities, saw them beginning to understand that they had choices now, that survival wasn't their only goal anymore. What do you think? She asked them. All of you. This affects everyone. They debated for an hour, sitting on the courthouse steps while the celebration continued around them. William wanted to keep the land as a safety net. Margaret thought they should sell and invest in education. James suggested they could do both, sell some parcels, keep others, build something sustainable. In the end, they decided to wait, to take time to consider properly without the pressure of immediate crisis driving their decisions. We don't have to decide everything today, Clara said. We can just breathe for a while, figure out what we want our lives to look like instead of just reacting to what's being done to us. The journey back to the ranch felt different from the journey to the capital. Lighter somehow, despite the same wagons and same roads. The community that had formed in shared struggle was already beginning to disperse, people heading back to their reclaimed properties and rebuilt lives. But the connections remained. They'd exchange letters, visit when possible, stand ready to help each other if Hartwick or men like him tried again. Emily Carson hugged Clara goodbye at the crossroads where their paths diverged. You started something important, she said. Not just the case against Hartwick, but the idea that we don't have to accept injustice quietly. That matters. It was your documents that made the difference, Clara said. Your willingness to risk Hartwick's retaliation. We both took risks. That's what it takes sometimes. Emily smiled. Take care of that family of yours, and if you ever need anything, you know where to find us. The ranch appeared on the horizon at sunset on the third day, the White House and red barn golden in the fading light. Clara felt something loosen in her chest at the sight of it, some tight knot she hadn't known was there. We're home, Emma said sleepily from where she rode in front of Clara on the saddle. Yes, sweetheart, we're home. That night, after the children were settled and the horses tended and the normal routines of ranch life resumed, Clara found Luke on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Feels strange, he said when she joined him, not having a crisis to manage. I'm not sure I remember how to live without one. Clara leaned against the porch rail beside him. These past months it's been survival and fighting and just trying to make it to tomorrow. I don't know what to do with peace. Learn to trust it, I suppose. Though it won't last forever, life has a way of providing new challenges. Optimistic as always. Well, Luke's smile was slight but genuine. Realistic. But the challenges ahead are different from the ones behind. They're the normal kind, raising children, running a ranch, building a life. I'll take that over desperately trying to keep your family from being torn apart. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the way shadows fell across the property she'd come to think of as theirs, rather than his. About this marriage, she began. We don't have to talk about it now. You're tired. We just got back. I want to talk about it. Clara turned to face him fully. We married for protection, for legal standing, for practical reasons that had nothing to do with affection or partnership. I remember. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a legal arrangement and started feeling like, Clara searched for the right words, like something real, something I want to keep being real. Luke's expression softened. I fell in love with you somewhere between watching you refuse to give up on your children and watching you stand up to Hartwick in that courtroom. I don't know exactly when, but I know I'm not interested in this being temporary anymore. Clara felt tears spill over despite her attempt to hold them back. I love Thomas. Part of me always will. But I'm starting to love you too, and it feels different. Harder earned maybe. Built on shared struggle instead of shared dreams. Shared struggle is a kind of dream, the dream of surviving together, of building something that lasts. Is that what you want? Something that lasts? With you and your 9 impossible children who've turned my quiet ranch into chaos? Luke pulled her close, his arms solid and steady around her. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Clara let herself sink into his embrace, let herself believe, truly believe, that this was allowed, that she could have this safety and partnership and growing love without it being torn away. I want that too, she whispered. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The children returned to their routines, but with a lightness that hadn't existed before. James worked alongside Luke with increasing confidence, talking about maybe apprenticing with a carpenter in town, but also loving the ranch work too much to commit. Margaret took over more of the household management, developing her own methods and systems, occasionally reminding Clara that she wasn't a child anymore and didn't need constant supervision. The younger children bloomed in the security of knowing they weren't leaving, weren't running, weren't about to be torn apart. William grew 3 inches in as many months and started talking about maybe becoming a lawman someday, inspired by Judge Morrison's integrity. Catherine and Grace turned the overgrown garden into a productive vegetable plot that fed the family and provided surplus for trading in town. Even Emma, who'd been so fragile for so long, started gaining weight and color, her laughter ringing through the house with increasing frequency. Clara threw herself into making the ranch house truly theirs, adding small touches that transformed it from Luke's bachelor residence into a family home. Curtains in the windows, quilts on the beds, photographs and small treasures that spoke of the life they were building together. The money from the restitution settlement arrived 6 weeks after the trial. Clara stared at the bank draft for longer than she should have, still not quite believing that numbers on paper could represent security, could mean choices and possibilities instead of desperation and loss. They used some to expand the house, adding 2 bedrooms so the children weren't sleeping 4 to a room. Used more to buy cattle and improve the property. Set aside a portion for each child's future, education, apprenticeships, whatever paths they eventually chose. The rest went into a savings account, a cushion against disaster, proof that they'd learned from loss and wouldn't be caught completely vulnerable again. Clara sold the redemption property to a young family just starting out, took satisfaction in watching them build their own dreams on land that Thomas had loved. She kept one small parcel with the family cemetery, where Thomas rested under a cottonwood tree. She visited once, took the children, stood at her first husband's grave and told him about the life she was building. "I hope you'd understand," she said quietly, her hand on the sun-warmed headstone. "I hope you'd want this for us. Safety and love and a future that doesn't hurt. I'll always love you, but I'm learning to love him too, and I think that's all right." The wind through the cottonwood sounded almost like blessing. Luke found her there, stood beside her in comfortable silence until she was ready to leave. "Thank you," Clara said as they walked back to the wagon where her children waited, "for giving me time to say goodbye properly. We've got all the time we need now. That's the gift of not running anymore." By the time harvest season arrived, the ranch was truly thriving. The cattle herd had doubled, the garden produced more than they could eat, and Luke's small carpentry side business, mostly furniture for neighbors, had grown enough that James was handling half the orders himself. They held a harvest dinner in October, inviting neighbors and friends, the house bursting with people and noise and life. Clara stood in her kitchen watching her children move through the crowd, Margaret serving food with quiet grace, James deep in conversation with the blacksmith about metalwork, William making the younger children laugh with some elaborate story, all of them healthy and whole and home. "You did good," Emily Carson said, appearing beside Clara with a knowing smile. "Your kids look happy." "They are." Finally, Clara watched Luke showing Daniel how to carve the roast, patient and thorough in his instruction. "We all are." "And the marriage, still practical and temporary?" Clara laughed. "Not even slightly. Turns out falling in love with your husband of convenience is complicated, but worth it. Most worthwhile things are complicated." Emily touched Clara's arm gently. "You earned this happiness. Don't forget that. After everything you went through, everything you survived, you've earned the right to just live." The words stayed with Clara through the evening, through the laughter and stories and the slow exodus of guests as night deepened. After the children were in bed and the house was quiet, she found Luke on the porch again, their customary place for late-night conversations. I was thinking, Luke said without preamble, about next spring. Thought we might add a workshop onto the barn. Give James proper space for carpentry. Maybe teach Daniel and Samuel the basics. They'd like that. Clara settled beside him, their shoulders touching. I was thinking, too, about maybe hiring a teacher to come out once a week, give the children proper lessons. Margaret's been doing her best, but she shouldn't have to carry that responsibility alone. Good idea. The ranch can afford it now. Luke paused. Strange how that sentence sounds. The ranch can afford it, like we're actually planning for a future instead of just surviving the present. We earned the right to plan, Clara echoed Emily's words from earlier. And I think we should start planning bigger, not just for next season, but for years from now, where we want the children to be, how we want the ranch to grow, what kind of life we want to build together. Together. Luke turned the word over carefully. I like how that sounds. So do I. Clara took his hand, threading their fingers together. When we married, I thought it was just a legal arrangement to keep my children safe. I didn't expect to find a partner. I didn't expect to find love. Love wasn't part of the deal, Luke agreed. But I'm not complaining about the amendment. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, feeling the solid weight of the house at their backs. Full of sleeping children, full of life and noise, and the beautiful chaos of family. A year ago, Clara had been walking a dirt road with 9 starving children and no hope. Thomas was dead, her home was stolen, and the world had shown her nothing but cruelty and rejection. She'd been one day away from complete collapse, from losing everything she had left. Then a quiet rancher had offered water and shelter, asking nothing in return. And somehow, impossibly, that small kindness had grown into this. A ranch that felt like home. Children who laughed instead of just survived. A marriage that had transformed from necessity to something real and chosen and wanted. What are you thinking about? Luke asked quietly. About how much can change in a year. How far we've come. Clara squeezed his hand. About how grateful I am that you found us on that road. I didn't find you. You found me. You and your 9 children, and your absolute refusal to give up. Luke's voice was warm with affection. You saved yourself, Clara. I just provided the space for you to do it. We saved each other. Clara leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. And we saved them. That's what matters. Inside, one of the children stirred, probably Emma, who still sometimes woke in the night seeking reassurance. Clara started to rise, but Luke held her still. Margaret's got her. Listen. Through the open window, Clara heard Margaret's soft voice soothing Emma back to sleep, heard her daughter humming the same lullaby Clara had sung to all of them over the years, heard Emma's breathing settle into the deep rhythm of sleep. She's growing up, Claire said, pride and heartbreak mixing in her chest. They all are. That's what they're supposed to do, grow up safe and loved and whole, then go build their own lives. I know, but I'm allowed to be sad about it anyway. You're allowed to feel anything you want. Happy, sad, scared, grateful, all of it at once if that's what fits. Luke's voice held understanding born from his own experience of loss and rebuilding. That's what being human is. Holding all the complicated feelings at the same time and choosing joy anyway. Clara thought about that, choosing joy despite the losses behind them and the uncertainties ahead, choosing to build in hope and love even though she knew how quickly it could all be taken away. It wasn't naive or foolish. It was brave. Then I choose this, she said firmly. I choose this life, this family, this future we're building together. All of it, complicated feelings and all. Good. Luke pressed a kiss to her temple, simple and affectionate. Because I choose it too. I choose all of you, you and your 9 impossible children, and the beautiful chaos you've brought to my quiet ranch. Every single day, I choose this. They sat together as the night deepened, 2 people who'd found each other in desperation and built something lasting through choice and effort and daily devotion. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a real life, hard-earned and deeply valued, full of work and love and the knowledge that they'd faced the worst and survived it together. Inside the house, 9 children slept peacefully in beds that were truly theirs in a home that couldn't be taken away. Outside, the Wyoming stars blazed overhead, indifferent to human struggle but beautiful nonetheless. And between earth and sky, Clara Hayes Calder sat with her husband's arm around her shoulders and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely at peace. The weight of 9 lives no longer felt like burden. It felt like blessing, like purpose, like the exact right amount of love to carry into tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. They'd survived the breaking point,